Well, good morning. Happy Mother's Day to those to whom it applies. Always a busy time of year, so we always want to pack more into May than maybe it belongs, but that's where it is. Today we're going to turn a corner in a sense in the story of Joseph, and I want to ask you this question: what would life look like 50 years from now? You don't know. You don't plan to be here to find out, do you? Okay. Well, I didn't ask whether you'll be there. I said, what do you think it will be? I don't plan to be there either. So, what do you think it'll be like? We don't know. Okay, that we're still not there exactly. There's an interesting idea. In 1955, I chose that year because that's the year I was born. Nothing special about it, but it's easier to calculate. And so, in 1955, this is what people thought would happen in 50 years. They believed that we would have wristwatch TVs and phones. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, your wrist rings. They figured we'd be like Dick Tracy. Dick Tracy, you couldn't write Dick Tracy today because you'd have to change everything for him because we've already got it. They believed in robot-powered warehouses. Did you know that Amazon has just developed a robot called Vulcan, in which they suspect that within 5 years, 75% of all their warehouse work will be done by this robot? Now, that's good and bad for all kinds of reasons. They believe there'll be colonies on other planets, and they're still working on that one. They built powerful rockets that they can't get past the upper atmosphere, it seems like. So it's a long way to Mars, for instance. They believe that we'd have walking machines. MIT has developed a walking robot that can break dance. And if you really want your own, there's a company that came out with you have to print it at home using I forgot what they call it, the 3D printers, and you do it but on a home printer like that. And for $5,000, you can build your own home robot that will take care of you. So if that interests you, I don't have a link. I'll send it to you. Push button education. Now, while that sounds fanciful, I talked to my oldest daughter yesterday, who is a sixth grade teacher in Plano. Her test scores for math came up 15 points over last year. They said, what did you do? She said, I put them on the computer program for 30 minutes a day and quit talking. And they learned a lot better. So push button education is here. Or self-driving cars. Are you aware that in Dallas, Texas, in July of this year, Waymo will begin providing driverless taxis? My daughter had one of those in Phoenix. They got out at the airport. They called a driverless taxi to their hotel. She said, it was really pretty cool. She said, we just talked among ourselves and just kind of pulled away where we wanted to. Now, I would like to do that. One of the members here told me he had a friend that said he bought a Tesla not because of the situation going on right now, but because that if it became self-driving, maybe his kids would not take away his car when he got old. Not a bad excuse. Solar power cars, we haven't gotten there yet, but they're working on that. Or electronic home libraries. After a fashion, this lesson today was created with an electronic home library. I have a Bible program that has 5,000 volumes in it. When I got rid of my library, when I retired, most of it I still had because it's electronic. Absolutely amazing. If I'd have known that when I got out of college, I wouldn't have bought so many books, but I did. So the future looks differently, and also home computer desktop computers. Yeah, remember in 1955 they took up rooms. The UNIVAC would take up room. You had to have punch cards. And now we do everything here. So that's the way things kind of work. The Romans had a god named Janus. Janus was always portrayed as a god with two faces. One was looking backwards, and it was always portrayed as an ancient face, an old face that had worn out. Then the other side was looking forward, and it was always portrayed by a young face. Janus, the word means threshold in Latin, and it's like you were going to cross a threshold, and that's why our month of January is named after Janus. It is our threshold time where we dispense with the old and go forward with the new. And that's what's happening in today's lesson. Everything up until now, the last several lessons, everything had a backward glance, something that had happened in the past. No one talked about really the future, but everything that seemed to come up was past related. For instance, you look at these things, the dreams of Joseph, even though when he had them, they were future oriented, always after that they kept looking back, especially when his brothers would bow down to him, the dreams would pop back up. It was the past coming to fruition. And then you had the death of Rachel. The death of Joseph's mother was an important event because it was something that Jacob could not let go of. When he gets what he thinks is the news of Joseph's death, he will not be consoled because he was the son of Rachel. So when even his family goes through intense famine, he's willing to have them starve to death rather than risk the second son of Rachel. Rachel was always playing a big part in this because she was the woman that Jacob loved and that Joseph and Benjamin's mother. And that was always going to be a haunting situation. There's slavery in prison and pain. And you look at this, all the things that has happened to Joseph, they're all in his past, but they all contribute to where he is now. Potiphar's house and the moral condition that he maintained, the prison where he helped people and he interpreted dreams, gave him the input to be able to become the prince of Egypt because he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh. And so all of the things of the past had worked together. And then there was grief and pain. Jacob's grief and pain was there, but also the famine created a lot of things. All of the things we talked about were happening, but they all had kind of a root in the past in a way. And so today, everything starts to look forward. It changes orientation. It looks in a different way. We don't, sometimes we grow nostalgic and say about the good old days. Number one, the good old days were just old. They weren't that good. But the second is, talking about the good old days does not advance you to go forward. And so today the story goes forward, and we start with the family reunion. So let me ask you something. Have you been to a family reunion? What was a family reunion like to you? Wonderful. Why? Okay. Is that memory from adulthood or childhood? Adulthood. Why is that? Okay. I found out that there's a difference between those two things, childhood and adulthood, when you go to family reunions. When I was a boy, we had a family reunion of my father's family. It was in Cooper, Texas. My grandfather was the youngest of 11 kids. Half of those brothers and sisters, I had no earthly idea who they were. They drugged me to Cooper, Texas in July. Do you realize that in Delta County, there's nothing to do? Especially if you're a kid. They had one movie theater, Sparks, and they didn't even show very good movies. And you sat around and you watched all these old people chewing tobacco and spitting their snuff. I was disgusted, and I hated that. And they'd say, we need to have another reunion. I said, please don't. Well, but then when you get to be an adult, it's a little different because now you get to talk about some things. I remember when Vicky's aunt died about a year and a half after her mother did. We went to the funeral home, and we sat there visiting with cousins and things. And then she also had a friend there who started telling stories nobody had ever heard, about how when she was 15 and her husband was 16, they ran off to Oklahoma to get married, and then didn't come home and tell their parents and live with their parents for a year before they got the guts up to tell them. And then 30 years later, they get a phone call from the state of Oklahoma that says, I'm sorry, but the clergyman who married you was not licensed in this state. And so they had to go back down and get remarried. And I'll never forget, Uncle Eddie was one of these guys. He would say, he was in line, all these young couples in there, and they look at them, and he said, oh, don't worry about it. We've been living together for 30 years. And Vicky's aunt could have killed him. But you learn those kind of things. You don't know anything like that unless you have family reunions. It's just, but as an adult, you like them. You begin to understand path. As a kid, you don't really care. And so a lot of time has to pass for this to happen. And so we left you last week with the reunion, if you will. Joseph, the brothers come back and say, Joseph is alive. Daddy says, I'm not going to believe it. It's incredulous to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. I've got this robe dipped in blood. I've been keeping it forever, and it just proves he's dead. He can't be alive. He's alive. Well, I can't believe it. Until the royal chariots or royal carts begin to roll in, and he sees them, and he finally says, I am convinced my son Joseph is still alive. And look at the next statement. I will go and see him. This is the future for Jacob. I now am going to do something. He's not sitting in his grief, worrying about the past, worrying about his sons dying. He now has a reason to go forward. And so it says that Israel set out with all that was his. Now, he's 130 years old. Would you move if you were that old? I cleaned out 2. The accumulation is just amazing. And but what you think about it, Jacob has never moved. There's a reason for that we're going to get into, but this would have been hard for him. He was kind of stuck in his ways. He was stuck with the death of Joseph. He was stuck where he was. He was stuck because that's where his family lived all the time. Family household. The old family homestead. He lived in a place that Abraham had lived in, that Isaac had lived in, and now he lived in. And now he's going to have to go somewhere. There's this quote I like from Douglas MacArthur. When he turned 75, he made a speech in which he said, in the central place of every heart, there's a recording chamber, and so long as it receives messages of beauty, hope, cheer, and courage, so long are you young. When the wires are all down and your heart is covered in the snows of pessimism and the ice of cynicism, then, and only then, are you grown old. What that basically means is old people look backwards, young people look forwards. You want to grow old? I can tell you how to do it. Keep reminiscing about the good old days. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Don't tell me, tomorrow I've got to get out of bed to do this. Don't say, oh, I've got this project I've always wanted to start. There's this thing I've always wanted to learn. That's how you stay young at heart, but you go old when you go, well, it's all behind me. I don't have anything else to do. An interesting concept. And so here is Jacob moving at 130 years old. But when he leaves, it says he reached Beersheba. Beersheba is this laden with theological importance for his family. Just to let you know where Beersheba is, here's where he starts off. He starts at Shechem. Shechem would one day become the capital city of Samaria, and in the time of Jesus, called Sychar. At Sychar, there's a well that a woman sits down next to, and Jesus sits next to her and says, "Give me something to drink." It's the well that Jacob dug there. It has a lot of history, Shechem. That's where everybody settled. The only problem is they had other interests at Beersheba, which is way down here as you move out of the highlands into the deserts. And so Beersheba is in a place that begins the Negev, the desert areas of the region. And you find out that it has pretty significant problems with the family. When Abraham had problems with the Hittites, he goes to Beersheba, and there at Beersheba they swear an oath. When the Hittites are struggling with Isaac over wells he has dug and they have filled them back in, a very serious charge if you live off of whatever comes, the water that comes out of the ground, he has to go to Beersheba to negotiate a treaty with the Hittites. It is a place where you have covenants made. An important idea. And so Jacob stops first at Beersheba, and it says, and he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. I suspect, now I can't prove this, I suspect he found the altar that was built by Abraham, because we know in the book of Genesis, wherever Abraham went, he built an altar and sacrificed there. I suspect he found the same altar and sacrificed on that altar to the God of his father. There's a reason I think it says the God of his father Isaac, as we're going to get to. But here he was, in this sacred of places where all kinds of deals were made, and there he's sacrificing to God. And God says to him, he comes to him in a vision, and he says, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there." Do you think Jacob needed to hear that? Everything may be extinguished. It was good, okay. I want you to think about that question. Why did he need that? It's an interesting idea. Why does God say what he says to Jacob in this vision? Do not be afraid to go to Egypt, for I'll make of you a great nation. You got to go back in time. Genesis chapter 12. We all know Genesis 12. Abraham is told to leave his country and his kinsmen. And he says, and I want you and go to a land, what's that word? A land I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. We know that. Center in on the idea that says, I want you to go to the land that I'll show you. He leaves one place and goes to the place that God told him to go to. There's something significant, I think, in that. Because could it be that in the mind of Jacob, that if I leave this land, God can't fulfill his promise here? He said, go to the land, and here's how it's interpreted. There I will make of you a great nation. There I will make your name great. There you will be a blessing. What happens if you leave the land and you go to some other place How is that going to work out for you and your family? The promise of God is everything coming to an end. It's a big idea. And so God says to him, he said, I will go with you. You go down. I'll fulfill my promises to make you a great nation there. See, the there is important. You left the land, but I want you to go there. He says, and I will go down with you, and I will surely bring you back again. We're going to find that last part in next week's lesson. But he says, I'll be with you in Egypt. Now that parallels his son Joseph's experience. There's at least 3 times in Joseph's story where it says, and the Lord was with him. Potiphar's house, the prison, and the palace. The Lord was with him. The Lord is not tied to a land. The Lord is not tied to a place. That was always a problem. Israel had that problem. Judah had that problem for years. After all, when you get to Jeremiah chapter 7, the scribes and the priests and everybody says, God can't take this away because we got his house here. Meaning, we got God in the box. As long as we got the box, we got God. What happens if the box gets taken away? Can God escape? Yeah, he can escape. Because he's not in the box. He says, I'll go down to Egypt with you. I can be here, I can be there, I can be everywhere. Think about how hard that is for most people to believe. God is in the church building. He can be, but he's also out there at the same time. We can't. We're in the church building, we're outside, but we can't be both places at once. God can. And so there's this idea behind it we're going to return to today. It comes out of Genesis chapter 15. In Genesis 15, God tells Abraham, as he spreads out the stars of the heavens in front of him and says, this is how big your nation will be, as numerous as the stars, if you can count them. And so he says, look at this. He said, now I want you to tell you something. Know for certain, keywords, that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers, big idea that we're going to look at too, in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. And says, but I will bring them back here. Think about what's happening during this time. Do I dare leave the land, go to this other land? How long are we going to be there? And can God fulfill his promise if I'm not there? Genesis 15 says this has all been planned out. This is all what's been foretold. And so it says that Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters and their offspring. Now, I want you to trace something out. When Abraham got to Canaan, he had no children. He worried about that. He was anxious about it. I don't have a kid. How am I going to have a great nation if I don't have a kid? So let's see if we can manufacture one. Well, that didn't work. And so God, in his old age, when he can't have children, God miraculously gives them children, a child named Isaac, who happens to be Jacob's father. Jacob and Rebekah have 2 sons. Just 2. Jacob and Esau. Then Jacob comes along and he has 12 sons. And when you read this story, it says that if you include the ones that have been born to Joseph, the members were 70 in all. Growing number. It's advancing in number. If you'll go 5 chapters later where the book of Exodus starts, 400 years later, they're innumerable to the point that they can overwhelm Egypt. Something happening as an undercurrent here. It's an interesting idea. God needs to be a part of great decisions. You know, people don't use God to make great decisions. They make the decision and hope God blesses it. They want God to put their hands on them and say, yeah, good, I agree with you. You do what you want to do because I'm in it with you. And so people, you know, have you ever had somebody ask you for advice and you give them your advice and they don't follow it? And you go, why do I bother? Because they didn't want your advice. They wanted your affirmation. Yes, you have this all right. Yes, go do what you want to do. I'm all behind you. That's how we treat God sometimes. But it's interesting that the writer of Proverbs reminds us of a reality. He said, commit to the Lord all you'll do, and He will establish your plans. It's got to start with God and end with God. And in their human hearts, they plan their course. But the Lord will establish their steps. Just because you want to go there doesn't mean God's going to let you. Ask Paul. On numerous occasions, God said, no, you're not going that direction. He says, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that will prevail. That just because you want to do it doesn't mean that's what God's going to do. That'll eliminate a lot of bitter disappointment in your life once you grasp it. And so make sure God's inside of your plans at some point. And so the families make this journey. Now, this is a shot from space, and just to let you know where we are, this is where they left from, roughly here. That's Shechem. They make their way hugging the Mediterranean Sea, and they come into Egypt. I don't think they came here. I think they came here, but that's a difference of opinion, I suppose. But it's interesting. Look at the route they took and how they came in. Now, they make a direct route. Now, years later, Moses will not take that route with the children of Israel. It's the easiest way to get there. Well, it's the fastest way to get there. But it's not the easiest way because they're marauders, and God doesn't want the people to get discouraged because they can't wage war. But apparently, with the protection of Pharaoh, that's not a problem because Pharaoh is the big boy in the world at that point in time, and everybody's afraid of him. And so they come down, and as you see in this shot from space, there is this area that's very, very green. This is the Nile Delta. The reason it's called that is because it looks like a delta in Greek. I always like when they call something that's ancient, more ancient than Greek, after a Greek letter. I don't understand that, but that's what they do. But you know, it's green. Now everything else around it is brown. This is what your grass is going to look like in July, by the way. The day you water, it's going to look like that. The next day, it's going to look like that. It's just to give you some good news. But they're going to the Nile Delta, and it says that Jacob sent Judah as an advanced man to get direction. Judah has an important project. Judah's taking preeminence over Reuben. Reuben's the oldest who should be doing this job, but Reuben is no longer trusted because of his miscalculations. And Judah is the one who has stepped forward and said, I will protect Benjamin. I'll pay with my life. He is the one who utters the statement that says, what we're getting is what the Lord is paying us back for. He's recognizing something, and now he's sent here. Judah's going to take this leading position, which foreshadows what will happen in the future as well. And Joseph gets in his chariot, rolls out to meet his father, and it says, and when he appeared, they threw their arms around each other and wept for a long time. One person has said, when Joseph came out there in the chariot, he was the prince of Egypt. But when he was holding his father and his father was holding him, he became a lost little boy. And Jacob says, now I fulfill my life's purpose. I've seen what I need to see. What do you think that moment meant for both Jacob and Joseph? Exactly. They weren't analyzing anything in that way. It's interesting because something was happening. And Pharaoh says, I'm going to give you the land of Goshen. He said, It is the best part of the land. And Goshen, I think I've got a map here somewhere, is right here. Goshen is where Cairo is today, and the Nile is right here. The Nile River flows through it. If you're a shepherd, you need grass. You're going to get the grass because it's the most well-watered place in the whole place. Now, just to let you know, Memphis is where the kings live. Go on down, there is a temple back at Hatan, and then Thebes, where today is the Valley of the Kings, and so they get the Nile Valley to live in. It's going to bear fruit in the future. And notice something. Almost about this. If one day Moses has to leave Goshen to take people to Canaan, which is over here, if he's down here, think about how much harder that journey is going to be, as opposed to this. There's a lot of foresight happening here. And so Joseph's trying to straddle two cultures. And so he says to his brothers, he said, when you get there, don't tell them you're shepherds because they can't stand shepherds. Tell them you keep livestock. It's not a falsehood. He says because they just detest shepherds. And so I'm sure they're all nodding, yeah. Until you get to the next passage. So Pharaoh asks, what's your occupation? And they say, we're shepherds. Duh. I mean, Joseph must have gone, oh my. He can control all of Egypt, but he can't control his brothers. Now, that's true about your family. You might have great power, but you don't have any power over your 15-year-old kid. I mean, if you don't understand that. But they also say something else, says, we have come to live here for a while. It's a single word that means sojourn. It means to be a foreigner in a foreign land. When you go backward in time to Genesis 15, the word is you will be foreigners in a land that is not your own. Same word. Same word. And that word, stranger, he said, you're not going to be here for the rest of your life. This is different. You're just putting down stakes until you're going to move on. I like it because that's what Peter uses. He says, he addresses his audience in his first letter is as exiles and strangers on earth. Where we get the song, this world is not my home, I'm only passing through. We don't belong here. We're just sitting here for a while. Pitched our tent, as Paul would say. When the tent gets ragged, we give it up and go back home. And so they were going to be strangers in this land. And so Jacob comes in, is presented before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asks him these questions. And one of the things he says is, the years of my pilgrimage, same word, are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they don't equal the years of the pilgrimages of my father. He's 130 years old, and he is blessed, and he's given provision for what he needs. Now, at that moment, a bridge to the Exodus that will take place 400 years later is built. I want you to think, this is 2025, 400 years ago, was 1625. You realize that the pilgrims had only been here a year? Who could have foreseen what was going to take place? Who could have foreseen in Jacob's family that one day a column of 1 million people will exit Egypt in the same way they came in? And yet the future is being built in the present, but no one can see it. It's an interesting idea because when you face the future, there's some things you have to face in the future. One is you don't know it. You only know the past. We always believe life will go on as it has gone on. No, it won't. I don't know what will happen. Neither do you. And the reason we look at stories like Joseph and other things is to remind us that the future doesn't look like the past. The future doesn't look like the present. One day, when you're long gone, the world will not look like it does now. You can't see that. We don't know the future. But we do know this. He said that life is always changing, whether you like life change or not. Jacob has to leave his property. He has to leave Shechem. That's a lot of change. Change is hard. If you've never moved, you've been blessed, I suppose. You know, I remember when we moved here 25 years ago, we lived here. We came from here. Vicki was born here. But you don't realize what happens when you have to change. You know what women look for? Hairdressers. You know what men look for? Doctors. And you have no way of knowing what it is. But you've gone through this change. You don't know where to shop. You know which grocery stores are better. You don't know where anything is. You get turned around every time you go somewhere. And yet things are changing all the time, whether we like it or not. So if you're afraid of change, I'm sorry to tell you, you're out of luck. Because it's going to happen. But God does know what the future is. And He knows what's happening. He knows what's going to take place. And it's easy for us to think that the world is out of control. It really is. That's only because we think we are in control of it. If it's out of control because we've messed it up, this is like when your son or daughter learns how to drive. The most frightening experience in the world for a parent is the day they get their learner's permit. You get in the car with them, and remember my wife, she would get in the car with our daughters, and she would be pressing invisible pedals, trying to stop the thing, grabbing the thing. And of course, if you're trying to teach your kid how to, grabbing everything they go around the corner does not help. Because you're no longer in control. And so, but God does know the future, and God is. And so, as long as you realize that, you're okay. So when things do change, trust that God knows what He's doing. He does. And even if you don't, go along for the ride. Don't grab the side thinking you can handle it. God's handling it.